the Future Talk, Insuring Our Planet, Protecting Communities and Biodiversity. Please welcome to the stage, Alissa Swango from National Geographic.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. My name is Alissa Swango, and I am the Vice President of Digital and at National Geographic, where I manage a team of editors and video producers who are publishing stories, providing useful context for millions of people globally every month across all the digital platforms. This includes our 800 million social media followers. And to be a 137-year-old brand with the largest following in the world is something that we're very proud of. And it's key to reaching and engaging younger audiences with the important issues that we face today. The work that my team does involves partnering with National Geographic Society, who provides grants to scientists on every continent of this planet who are doing groundbreaking work in all fields of science, including animal conservation, archaeology, paleontology, and all aspects of the environment, from protecting the depths of our oceans to exploring the heights of Everest. It's the work that these explorers, as we refer to them, that inspires our storytelling and informs our readers about the health of the planet and what can be done to solve some of the most urgent environmental issues. In fact, next week, we have 260 explorers coming from 40 different countries that are traveling to our headquarters in Washington, D.C. to share their most recent work in the field. We'll have a week full of conversation and idea sharing, similar to how we're about to have today, where we'll discuss solutions and how to be the best stewards of our planet. So to get started and pushing forward with that stewardship, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. And I'll invite them to come up on the stage. Roberta Casali, Vice President, Finance and Risk Management of the Asian Development Bank. Yep. Antoine Denoix, CEO of AXA Climate. Daniela Feltes, Director of Catalytic Partnerships at Finance in Motion. And Achim Steiner, Administrator for United Nations Development Program. Okay, and so let's begin. I'm going to start with you, Achim. How does the UNDP help create the right market conditions and governance systems to encourage innovative insurance solutions for nature and communities?
Thank you very much, and delighted to be here with my fellow panelists. Let me basically admit in advance I'm a bit of an insurance junkie in the development world, because a few years ago I began to discover the extraordinary potential that insurance would bring to, in a broader sense, de-risking the future. Secondly, also taking advantage of an industry and a field of business where actuarial science has fundamentally rewritten the way we price risk. And for instance, health insurance to most poor people is inaccessible. The traditional models of pricing an insurance premium were out of reach. Today, with actuarial science and the kind of precision with which an insurance company can essentially test a product, micro-health insurance has suddenly become an extraordinary possibility. And the same is beginning to happen in a broader context of climate change on the one hand. How can we help communities as part of an adaptation strategy? For instance, use insurance, and that has a lot to do already with nature and what nature, in a sense, is revealing to us in times of climate change. And then right down to biodiversity, where just a few weeks ago in Argentina, we had a world first with a jaguar insurance scheme that was developed together with the insurance industry and also the Argentinian government. And your question was, how do we as UNDP help? Well, first of all, by understanding how central insurance could be to so many different aspects in development, in conservation, in managing the growing risks to people and planet. And secondly, also, when you take a jaguar insurance, it's not that we're insuring the jaguar, although by default that's what the impact will be, because what we're actually insuring is the damage that a jaguar can do to the livestock of a farmer. And as some of you will know, when you go to parts of East Germany or parts of Europe today, we have the equivalent, the debate about a wolf. Should a wolf still be allowed to run around? Should it be reintroduced? Should it be allowed to come into our daily lives? Never mind the threat it may pose to community, but also to livestock. Insurance is a very elegant way in which you can at least deal with the economic damage, but you also create a better goodwill. We spend a lot of our time now in over 40 countries looking at how governments need to rethink their insurance regulatory framework, how it can be incentivized to reach people who usually would not be in the insurer's first line of clients. And thirdly, how we can leverage insurance to de-risk an economy, a community, and ultimately development decisions. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Great, thank you. The next question, Daniela. How is Finance in Motion supporting biodiversity conservation through your investment portfolios? And is there a role for insurance there?
Well, thanks a lot, first of all, for organizing the session and also for inviting us. So I think we have already a lot of tools in climate action, but which are not so easily just transferable to nature investment. So there is definitely a need for more innovation and also looking at deeper how insurance can benefit more in that area. So maybe just a quick word on Finance in Motion. We are probably one of the largest private impact asset managers, privately owned and specialized in emerging markets for 20 years, providing about 9 billion of impact finance to low and middle income countries. And our strength is in developing blended finance vehicles, so funds where you pool public money with private money in cooperation with development banks. And in nature finance, we focus on the biodiversity hotspots in Latin America and in Sub-Saharan Africa. Sorry. And the focus lies, for example, on agricultural, sustainable value chains. And here we have, for example, a coffee producer in El Salvador, which will be able to modernize the coffee mill and water savings and recycling technologies. And certainly insurance can play a better role here. And we would be very happy to explore more in how insurance can come into this blended fund.
Thank you. I'm going to jump to Roberta here. How is the Asian Development Bank using its investments to unlock private investment for nature finance? And what is the role of insurance?
Thank you, and also thanks to the organizer to inviting me at this panel. And let me start saying that investing in nature and biodiversity is connected to growth and development. And we are tackling the biodiversity crisis by putting all our balance sheet to work. On one side, we issue thematic bonds to raise capital. On the other, we finance directly projects that have positive nature results. And we have already a track record of thematic bonds. We start issuing our first water bond in 2010, and we continued with many different thematic bonds, including biodiversity bonds. In 2021, we issued our first blue bond to finance the protection of ocean health and marine biodiversity. But the key milestone was last year when we issued our first biodiversity and nature bond in Cali, so at the Biodiversity COP16, and the value of this bond was $100 million, exactly the same amount that we had for the blue bond that I previously mentioned. And what is relevant here is that we had already a pipeline of 700 million projects. So to finance, to raise money from the market, backed with a pipeline of projects that were already targeted to biodiversity and nature. And Dai-ichi Life Insurance was from Japan, was our first buyer. How we work with insurance. Just beginning of May, when we had our annual meeting in Italy, in Milan, we signed a master agreement, a new one, because the first one was signed in 2022, in this case with 10 global insurers. To do what? To pass them part of our credit risk. This means that if insurers are taking some of the credit risk of the bank, more capital is free to be devoted and invested in projects. This was not, of course, targeted only to biodiversity and nature, but is an important way that shows how more and more we are building cooperation and business with the insurers so that we can enlarge and do more investment. Mm-hmm. And the role of insurance, let me just say this, can be, as of course, but we will hear from my fellow panelists here, as patient capital providers, insurers have long-term money that's perfect for nature projects, and has risk bearers. They can create innovative products that cover risks to ecosystem, agriculture, and of course, biodiversity, such as parametric insurance for coral reefs. But they can also enter in the pool country risk to protect against disaster. And they can include and integrate nature-related aspects into the traditional insurance product, so the property, the casualty, the liability. The challenge, of course, will be limited data on this. And last, there are also in the capital markets innovative products, such as the insurance-linked bonds in Hong Kong and Singapore. And these are interesting because they pass the risk to other capital markets investors. Let me stop here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Antoine, I didn't forget about you. How is insurance enabling nature conservation and restoration efforts and unlocking this capital?
So it's a big challenge. Thank you for the invitation. Maybe where do I talk? I talk from a strange animal which is called AXA Climate. So it's an entrepreneurial journey. I set up this company 6 years ago. We were starting from scratch. And we are now more than 200 team members, most of us being scientists. And we have one mission over the past 6 years, which is climate adaptation. So the big challenge for us, tackling biodiversity as insurers, is a cultural shift. Because as insurers, we like statistics and uniformity when we underwrite. And truly speaking, you know well the topic, but when you are tackling nature, you understand that you do not have any data, you cannot rely on statistics, and because of climate change, you cannot rely on the past to predict what is going to happen in terms of climate events. And for me, nature is singularity by design. Based on a few kilometers in terms of soil, you do not have the same reality of risk. So when you say that, the challenge is to switch from, I caricaturate a bit the pitch, but you switch from an actuarial underwriting to a scientific underwriting. So my first priority as a CEO of AXA Climate, launching this company, is to recruit scientists, is to be able to build physical knowledge of natural ecosystems in order to be able to underwrite. So this cultural shift in terms of underwriting is very, very important, because if we keep this paradigm of uniformity, standardization, and statistics, it will not fly for the market and the insurers. I can talk about one tool. You mentioned parametric insurance. It's not the A to Z, of course, of the solution, but it can be a great tool in order to secure and to insure natural ecosystems. By parametric insurance, we mean a very simple mechanism of insurance when you trigger payout based on satellites. So you do not anymore need to send claim adjusters on the field in order to check claims when you have a drought, floods, or the wildfires. So it has a significant impact in terms of cost. It's more cost effective. So it's a good way to bridge a gap of insurance in many, many emerging markets, especially for natural ecosystems. Just 2 examples to make it concrete. The first one is marine protected areas in Philippines. We protect through a parametric scheme, more than 80 MPAs in Philippines and Mexico also. It represents more than, let's say, 80,000 hectares, and it protects more than 10,000 fishers. So it has many indirect benefits on the communities. And the rule of the game is quite simple. If you follow me, you put at the center of a cycle the asset, the natural ecosystem, let's say the MPA. You cross a cycle, and if there is one tropical cyclone crossing the cycle at a certain category of severity, you pay out immediately. And the fact that you pay out immediately in terms of cash reduces drastically the level of severity of the claim and the disaster, because you can finance emergency. You can, in some kinds of corals, having divers diving in the sea in order to repair the corals after a few hours. So that's part of the solution. And another example is, because we talk about carbon, you have many projects of carbon that are financed by credit of carbon. It can be, for example, a project of forest restoration. But when you have wildfires, it jeopardizes suddenly all carbon conservation of the project. It can jeopardize the full integrity and the full profitability of the project. So we provide also parametric insurance in order to blend with finance and credit and loans from the banks, in order, if there is a bad event happening, we can secure at least the project and the stakeholders of the project. That's it for AXA Climate, but we provide also consulting, software, and many other topics, but we can talk about it later in the session.
Yeah. So as we just heard, nature-related finance innovations are growing. And if insurance can be a catalyst for biodiversity conservation and investment, is there an opportunity for a global platform to protect our natural assets like reefs and forests and wetlands? And how do you see collaborative efforts to unlock these investments at scale to help close the $700 billion biodiversity finance gap? So I'll ask each of you, and I don't know who wants to jump in first, but what does that look like, and how would your institution engage? Any volunteers? Let's start with Achim.
Well, I can perhaps kick off, because I would like to draw attention to a platform that exists already for a number of years, called the Insurance Development Forum. It's actually a very interesting illustration of precisely the kind of institutional commitment to exploring the frontiers of what practice is enabling us to do today. I'm listening to you, Antoine, just now, listening to how the ADB looks at capital markets, at bonds, how governments look at it, investors look at it. We try to bring together leading insurance companies from around the world with leading development players. I, together with the head of Swiss Re and other insurance companies, have co-chaired this forum, and it was particularly focused initially on climate. But much of what it is doing is precisely this bringing together of a private sector, insurance sector competence and capability with a public good, so to speak. And that public good is not necessarily in a generic sense. I mean, de-risking a coral reef or insuring against a natural disaster is one example, but it's also how governments need to rethink the insurance market. Because it's actually quite intriguing. In many countries, regulatory frameworks for insurance have not changed, sometimes for decades. And yet we have entirely new actors in the field. And one of the ways in which we use our global platform is to bring that best practice of an insurance sector that is way ahead in terms of its methodologies, scientific understanding, including the insurance. I just looked up the latest Insurance Development Forum launched a suite of free open access risk modeling tools for climate and disaster risk analysis. These are now accessible. They're open access tools that many can use. And we in UNDP then take this to the country level. We have insurance innovation challenges where we invite local insurers or perhaps partnerships to develop new insurance products. It's a kind of competition. We provide them with some technical assistance, and then things such as a habitat protection biodiversity fund emerged, as it did in Mexico, attracting investments and funding the conservation of key species. It's a smaller form of, in a sense, going to capital markets. Another example in Colombia is the parametric insurance scheme. And maybe, Antoine, you can still say a couple of words, because sometimes parametric insurance sounds really cool, but most of us may not always know what it means. So I leave that to you. But it is actually something I learned also, how how smart a way this is to introduce that sometimes at the level of a local national park, or, insurance more broadly helped us as UNDP. You may recall a potential disaster in the Red Sea 2 years ago that had been growing in terms of an oil tanker, the famous Safar that was anchored off the coast of Yemen. In the middle of a civil war, the UN and UNDP then took on this challenge of actually removing 1 million barrels of oil from the tanker before it would break apart. Without insurance and a very specific partnership with a set of insurances, we in the end involved 90 insurance companies to reinsure this insane operation. It's another great example of how public and private actors can really come together, and therefore the idea of platforms, I would say, maybe not a singular one. We can learn from the Insurance Development Forum, we can learn from things that happen at national level, and sometimes literally just an insurance company coming to aid a unique enterprise and then using its convening power in the insurance industry to reinsure, so to speak, that risk. These are just a few examples. Thank you.
Antoine, do you want to respond? Or?
Yes, I have a dream. It's to what I call mutualism. Why mutualism? Let me explain you why. Because when we face climate risk, when we are facing the challenge of adaptation, for me, the answer is really cooperation. Because when you are facing water scarcity in one watershed, in one place, we are supporting 2 cooperatives, agricultural cooperatives. They have no choice but cooperating. It was not really the case for the digital transformation. For me, it's quite certain that it will come, the cooperation necessity for this challenge of adaptation. And when you say cooperation, suddenly you say that if you want to create cooperation, you need a purpose for people around the table. Why do they contribute together? For what? And you understand that the question for me is the habitability of places. So it's a very local topic. How do we create the indirect conditions for communities to be able to keep being able to fulfill in one place? And if you follow me in my thinking process, you understand that if you want this purpose, this location-driven purpose, it should be local. So I do not believe in terms of, to go back to your question of platform, in the centralized approach, in a top-down approach, in the usual way we cooperate together. I strongly believe, and it's complementary to such other approach, more centralized, but I strongly believe that we can create new vehicles of financing, having different stakeholders locally around the table in order to finance, to insure. And when I was thinking about the future of AXA Climate in the coming years, finally I go back to the past. I read some books about the essence and the source of insurance, but back centuries ago, it was mutualism. And what is mutualism? I think it's part of the answer to the question today. Mutualism, it's direct democracy, it's solidarity, and it's the idea of sharing value to the ecosystem. It's people in one place coming together in order to solve a big and concrete problem that they face. I think what my dream would be to bridge a gap between what you just described, which is very important, that is to say this kind of global coalition of different actors, and very concrete topics for people. We are working on it on a first proof of concept of mutualism for agricultural sector. So it's in France, sorry for that, not outside France. We like agriculture in France, you know it. But we are relying on a conventional system of production with chemicals. And the problem of the transition is there is no incentive for farmers to reduce chemicals because he's trapped, I would say, in a system of production, economically speaking, that make sense for him to keep using chemicals in order to produce and to optimize the yield. What is interesting in the example of agriculture is the elephant in the room is what we call resilience. We like to talk about resiliency, to be resilient, etc. But it's very difficult to model resilience and to give value to resilience. It's really a challenge because we like in our corporate and organizations to optimize, but to give price and value to resilience is difficult. When you get local, it's possible. So the idea is to say, okay, if you are a farmer and you reduce the level of chemicals per hectare, it has indirect benefits, for example, on the pollution of water, because less chemical in the soil, less cost of public authorities in order to reduce pollution for water and inhabitants. So the idea is to have people that can give a price to indirect benefits. And you have a lot of indirect benefits, given, of course, the topic of biodiversity. So to resume my point, it's important not only to change our product in a silo way, our financing product, insurance product, and so on, but to change the process of working together. And for me, mutualism is not, I do not say that we should copy-paste mutualism in 25 in our societies, but it can be a source of inspiration, giving able at the end of the day to solve real problems of real people in real places.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about cooperation and collaboration. And so, Daniela, what does this look like? What does a global platform look like for Finance in Motion?
Well, I actually want to come in on Antoine's point, because taking this example of the Eco Business Fund that Finance in Motion advises, and that is already a cooperation of basic public and private players pooled in blended finance. The key partner is the local bank on the ground, because this local bank will receive green lending, so it will provide lending to the end beneficiary that already incentivizes the farmer to reduce the risks. So that's where the local partnership comes in. Basically, you provide the lending on certain terms that promote sustainable practices. And going back to this coffee farmer in El Salvador. So basically, it's modernizing the equipment, but it's also saving water. It's also having new recycling technologies. It is also renewing the way they grow the coffee by using shade-grown coffee plantation and so on. So by that, you already reduce the risk that the farmer is exposed a lot to, like extreme weather and so on. And then insurance could come in covering the residual risk, which is simpler for the insurance. It is also simpler for the farmer because the premium is lower. And like that is a great cooperation on the ground. And that's how basically I think we can think about products where insurance can come into these blended finance structures. And that's also why I think platforms to speak about this and to speak about how we can all cooperate better is absolutely welcome.
Mm-hmm. So Roberta, talk a little bit about Asian Development Bank and how they could benefit, or how we could benefit from a global platform.
Sure. Let me say that as a multilateral development bank, we finance, as I said, projects. So we blended with private sector to have more bankable projects that can definitely help. But we do not offer only all finance product, but we also offer technical assistance. And I would like to come up with what was started as the first response to your questions. Platforms that put together all the different actors are extremely important. We should even strengthen more what we have already in place, and of course also be open to new platforms that can develop. And as multilateral development bank, we also operate through technical assistance, which applies less capital, but are very much beneficial to create something that does not exist or need to be fostered. And last year we had the first climate and disaster risk forums that put together all the different actors, so insurance, reinsurers, think tanks, other multilateral development banks, and investors on a common platform. The bottom line is that we should enhance all our instruments because the gap is so huge that no one alone can do it. No one alone can do it. So, which means 700, it was said, 700 billion. We have to cooperate. Is a necessity. It's not a choice. It's something that we must do. So let me say that the key message here is nature is investable. Yes, it is. And the fact that someone was able to buy a first biodiversity and nature bond is a demonstration. It's not there alone. As I said before, is connected with a pipeline of projects which is solid and very much consistent. There are many ways in which we can act. And in our review of our strategy 2030, one of the two important aspects we would like to pursue are exactly climate action and private sector engagement. So this is the ground in which we move today. Insurance partnerships work and can work a lot. And the agreement that previously I mentioned is concrete, and it valued $2.75 billion. So, and again, collaboration is definitely key. Collaboration, because there is a lot to build on the different experience that on this stage, I think we all represent.
Antoine, you wanted to
maybe two examples of collaboration illustrating the need of platform. The first one is as an insurer, because we use parametric, we cannot send people on the field. So in order to give trust, we need to rely on NGOs in order to say there is a problem and to be able to leverage local understanding and to trigger payouts. So it's a very concrete example. And a very more important example is financing. Public authorities have no more money. I don't know where public authorities have money in the globe, including in Europe and even in France. So for me, the key element is to convince corporates to finance the adaptation of their places. But for that, they need to understand the risk that they do not see. I will give you one example, also in France, but it can inspire also geographies. In the Pyrénées-Orientales, in the south of France, next to the Mediterranean, you have a lot of drought. You have a huge water scarcity. People cannot use swimming pools, etc., and farmers cannot, in fact, irrigate their fields. We have convinced the sector of hotels, hospitality, to finance a study for farmers. And it's the opposite of the traditional scheme that you have in mind, that is to say there is water scarcity, there is a conflict between two sectors of activity, tourism and agriculture. Why did we succeed to create this cooperation mindset? Because we have been able to make it explicit, the dependencies, interdependencies between the two sectors. We go to see the tourism players and say, okay, farmers are in your scope, because where they are not happy because of water scarcity, they demonstrate. Journalists come from Paris, and you have no more tourists the next season. So the ability to make it explicit, the interdependencies, are very important and critical in order to go to see corporates that have margin and revenues and to say, okay, if you want to keep being able to operate in these places, you need to invest not only for your assets, physical assets, but also more globally for your stakeholders around.
Mm-hmm.
Could I maybe ask a short question, because this is very interesting what you describe, and maybe Antoine and others also might answer. You know, you spoke about mutuality or mutualism. I mean, at a certain point, there is a simple law of gravity insurance. You pay enough in order to be able to pay out. Mm. With the changing nature of risk and the escalation, or the in a sense exponential growth of risk and damage. The traditional response of insurance is to basically no longer insure a risk, or to charge such a premium that essentially you price most people out of that market. What is, in the kind of world you are describing and that we are all experimenting with now, what is actually happening to not let that become the reality? Because as a consumer, you already are confronted, but as an insurance industry and as a government that needs to find maybe sometimes a combination of insurance and taxpayers underwriting. Because going back to, for example, the natural disaster in Germany, just the Ahrtal, how long ago was it? 5 years, 6 years ago? Yeah. And that 6 hours of a flooding event in a very location-specific area cost the German taxpayer billions of euros. So I'd love to hear a little bit more, because I think to anybody who is thinking about, is insurance going to really help us to cope with this, or at a certain point we're all priced out of the insurance market?
I will not talk on behalf of the whole market, and your question is very important and deserves very diverse answers. I only talk from what I experience. For me, the agricultural sector is the most critical sector in terms of insurability. Nobody wants to insure farmers. Why? Because nobody wants to pay for premiums. Why? Because the value of agriculture is not clear. The value of agriculture is only food and the price that you pay in your shops. But when you look at what the indirect benefit on one farmer in one place, you can make it explicit many more indirect benefits. against flood. If for cattle, you switch from just importing soja and corn to go to grass, you will slow down the water cycle and you will have indirect benefits in terms of flood for the communities around. So part of my bet, our bet at AXA Climate, is to test another process, going back to the idea of mutualism, is to say, okay, it should be economically profitable, but we need to have people, stakeholders, paying for what they didn't pay before. On this example, public authorities paying to protect against floods. Water agencies paying to reduce the cost of treatment. And if we are able to have stakeholders paying and to have a larger view of the value, I think it will be part of the answer in terms of insurability. And you can do the same for floods. Huh? You can have the building constructors, the local insurers, the local bunkers, to set some rules of adaptation of houses in flood area, prone area places. But I insist it should be local, because when you want to have norms of building sectors at the national level, it doesn't fly locally because it's highly dependent on 1 or 2 meters, the risk of flood. So I think it can be repeated as a methodology.
May I just, your question is fundamental, is the question, I believe. We have an Asia Pacific Climate Finance Fund, a CLIF, already developing parametric insurance for coral reefs in different countries that share the same risks. Because the problem is exactly that. It's very costly. It costs a lot to protect against some risk. So if you put together some funds and the bank can, of course, put his money on, it's better. And in this case, the coral reefs countries interested in this insurance are Fiji, Indonesia, the Philippines, and the Solomon Islands. So we committed $3.8 million to this in 2022. And another example that can build, that help reducing the price is construct the pools. So regional risk pools that can be built among some countries that share the same risk. So again, we should see what we have today, let what we have today work, or if not work, change, because we are in a ground in which we all together are constructing something new, and of course, give room and space to any innovative ideas that can really drive the change and let our planet, the biodiversity as a public good, be protected and saved. Thank you.
Yeah. We have just a few minutes left, so I'll throw this question just to the group. What do you see as our biggest challenge right now? You mentioned one. Is there a challenge for your sector, and do you have a solution to solve that for the global platform?
Continue to work and continue to be open to new ideas. So bringing the private sector in for us is not only to bring more capital, but to bring ideas, to bring technology. I'm hearing today my colleague here, and I mean, it can be productive to start.
I need protection.
So it's really I mean, amazing what we can work and do together, because not only from sharing information and experience we can create something that is worth.
For me, the main challenge for insurance is to be systemic. We are systemic because we are global in terms of size, but as all other players, I'm talking about all sectors of activities, because we are very big, we are in silo in terms of department and teams. So we have what we call P&C, we have life insurance, and I think part of the challenge is to keep being very profitable in silo in all these different lines of insurance, but to be able to understand the global picture. If I go back to the question of farmers, if we are able to connect the impact on health of chemicals, the impact on yields, the impact of risk, we are able to be smarter as an insurer in order to embrace and to find solutions. So my wish is to be more systemic globally for all players. We are talking about platform, but if you talk about insurance, I think part of the challenge is there to connect between teams working on different products of insurance. Because at the end of the day, it's one place and the same health, whatever the stakeholders.
Collaboration again.
Collaboration again.
Daniela.
Yeah, I fully agree. And also it's the collaboration at different levels. You need this local element to it, and it needs to become systemic. So coming back to that example, if a farmer in wherever is really educated to reduce the risks because he gets lending only on certain green sustainable conditions, the risks for an insurer will also be lower, and therefore it can be coming more systemic in. So I could see an insurer coming into a blended fund concept where you design specifically this product that is needed and that could be combined with the green lending to give it to the local partners on the ground. And this is what we should explore in such a platform, for example.
Achim?
Well, let me just say, and I see the Minister of Iraq for the Environment, for example, here, and I think governments actually have to rethink the way that they can combine the way a government is meant to protect society, assets, and economy with the capabilities of a market for insurance. And I think one interesting example is in Europe, in Germany, I think Switzerland, Austria, there has been a moment when farmers wouldn't buy insurance against hail damage because the likelihood that you would be hit and the premiums that were being charged wasn't interesting. And yet when hail hit, it destroyed an entire family operation. So I don't know if it's still true today, but many years ago, the government then put in place essentially an obligation. Every farmer had to insure, which massively brought down the premiums because everybody contributed. And you created the kind of reserves that would allow you to bail out those who were damaged by hail. So this is an interesting policy question. Is it the taxpayer who has to basically step in, or is it everybody? Especially when we have these floods now and people return to the very same place, rebuild their houses there. At a certain point, the public purse becomes no longer willing to pay. And I think in the way that we can, for instance, also combine public policy objectives with the capacity of the health insurance sector. For many poor countries in the world, it is still difficult to have a national health security, social security scheme, national insurance scheme. But what is interesting in parts of Africa now, you essentially have a partial subsidy by government to attract a private insurer to provide micro health insurance. It's still a fraction of what it would cost if government were to set up a national insurance scheme, because with today's actuarial science, risk pricing capacity, a private sector insurance can bring the power of a broader platform into essentially a market that was completely closed to poor people. And I think this is something we are also learning in our development field. Yeah. So here are two examples where there is the private sector with what it can develop and offer and always looking for new markets. And here is the public sector trying to deal with public risks or economic, macroeconomic or individual safety nets that they need to develop. It's a real frontier for development. I think it's been fascinating to be on the podium with all of you, including attracting private capital into adaptation and into parts of the world that it normally wouldn't find itself. So also, I listened very carefully to what you were saying. Thank you.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you to all the panelists. Fantastic conversation.
Thank you.